Before going deeper into the third chapter, the human disciple, we took off on a different note, that is the characteristic relationship between Shri Krishna and Arjuna. And we have seen a completely different aspect than what is described in this chapter. Because as we said, this chapter would give us a very close analysis of the character of Arjuna, and especially the first moments when Arjuna gets into this dejection. So we'll take it up now, the reading of the third chapter, starting with paragraph 2. So first, in the first para, we have seen about the teacher of the Gita, who is the Lord seated within the heart of all beings, as he puts it here in the 18th chapter, verse 61, which says, "The Lord, O Arjuna, is seated in the heart of all beings, turning all beings mounted upon a machine by his Maya." So we have seen this aspect as well as the aspect of the avatar. And now Shri Aurobindo says, Arjuna, the disciple who receives his initiation on the battlefield, is a counterpart of this conception. He is the type of the struggling human soul who has not yet received the knowledge, but has grown fit to receive it by action in the world in a close companionship and an increasing nearness to the higher and divine self in humanity. So we see the words here, Shri Aurobindo writes, is Arjuna is a counterpart of this conception. This conception of the Lord, of the teacher of the Gita. So one is the teacher who is giving a new light, a new knowledge, but there has got to be somebody who receives it. And this receiving end is Arjuna. So you can see when Shri Aurobindo writes the word counterpart, this word really links up the inevitability of the Nara and the Narayana, the devotee and the Lord. As we said, they need each other. So this is the counterpart. Arjuna is the counterpart. But what's important to see is Arjuna has grown fit to receive it by action. He doesn't yet have the knowledge because he has been a man of action. But through his action, he has prepared himself. That is what is interesting. That receive it by action in the world in a close companionship and an increasing nearness to the higher and diviner self in humanity. So the way he has acted in the world, that has kind of prepared him. So that shows what way Arjuna acted in the world. With all his wars, with all his romances, with all his talents, with all his works done, there must have been a specific attitude. You see, we are all working in the world. Everyone is working. But are we ready to receive that higher knowledge? So working with a different attitude is what prepares you. Just work for the heck of work, just work for the satisfaction of work, doesn't prepare you for spiritual consciousness. So that's what is interesting here when Shri Aurobindo writes, who has not yet received but has grown fit to receive it by action. So what could be that kind of work which prepares you to receive the higher knowledge? And that kind of work is what is commonly known as karma yoga. You see, karma done for the sake of karma is not yoga. We are all doing works and karma. But it's not necessarily we are doing karma yoga, because most of us do, or majority 99%, 9.9%, we do the work as work. But karma and karma yoga are completely different. Karma yoga is when you do the work in order to link yourself with the higher. Yug is to unite the lower and the higher. So when you offer your work, when you dedicate your work, when you really give it as a constant surrender to the divine, then karma becomes karma yoga. So that is what prepares you. Otherwise, just the work has no spiritual value. It may have all the material value for your satisfaction, ego and money and fame and all that. So let's not, because I'm clarifying this a little more, because a lot of the Indians have this habit of calling somebody karma yogi. Just because he has achieved or becoming the chief manager of a company, when he's retiring, all the blah blah, we say, oh, he has been a great karma yogi, he has brought 50 million profit to the company. Not at all. So let's not flatter people calling them karma yogis. And that is our Indian character. We want to flatter people by calling them jnana yogis and karma yogis, because we think the appellate yogi is a big thing. Yeah, you can apply it very easily, but you attain it with great difficulty. Because remember, yoga means the union of the lower with the higher, the union of man with the divine. So if you use karma for that union, then only you are a karma yogi. So that probably is what is meant when Sri Krishna, when Arjuna is said to have prepared himself to receive this knowledge by his close companionship and increasing nearness to the higher and divine self in humanity. So he did not offer himself to Sri Krishna, because he didn't even know that Sri Krishna is the Lord up until the end. But he was in close companionship with Sri Krishna. But what is important is increasing nearness to the higher. That means in humanity, he saw this divinity. So he offered his work, his karma, to the betterment of humanity, to the divinity in humanity. Now, this is the first idea. And there's a little break in the idea now. Suddenly Sri Aurobindo takes off another explanation. He said there's a method of explaining the Gita in which not only this episode but the whole Mahabharata is turned into an allegory of the inner life and has nothing to do with our outward human life and action, but only with the battles of the soul and the powers that strive within us for possession. That's a view which the general character and the actual language of the epic do not justify, and if pressed, would turn the straightforward philosophical language of the Gita into a constant, laborious and somewhat puerile mystification. Because this is again an exaggeration. When people say, no, Gita is more a symbolic thing. There's nothing of the war, there's nothing of Kurukshetra. It is a symbol of an inner battle. The Kauravas are the anti-divine forces, Pandavas are the divine forces, Arjuna is the inner being, Lord seated within you is the avatar. So the whole Gita has been interpreted more as an inner battle than a real situation. But Sri Aurobindo says that's not right. Because first of all, the language, you see, it's very interesting to see how a critic can understand things by the language used, not only the substance and the inner experience. He says, look at the language of the Gita and the language of the Vedas and the language of the Upanishads. There's a remarkable difference in all these things. Veda is fully symbolic. All the stories they tell about the gifts of the horses, the cows coming in the evening, and all the, the symbolism of the dark sun, the sun within matter, the sun under the rock. That could be symbolic. and we need to interpret the Vedas. That was what we say, the language of revelation. So revelations are always garbed in a kind of a mystic and a symbolic language. But then when we come to the Upanishads, we have this intuitive language. In the Upanishad, there is no symbolism, but there is an intuition. Language becomes more straightforward, although not yet fully, and it is full of the vision, the experience. So we call this an intuitive language, which is not easy for the mind to grasp. And yet, you see the expression is different. So what we see when we come to the Gita, it lowers down. The language comes down to another level which is more or less illumined or the higher mind language, which is more straightforward, does not garb itself in symbolism. It's straightforward. So he says, it is straightforward philosophical language of the Gita. So as it comes closer to the mental level, the language becomes simpler, plainer, and understandable by the mind. So he says, if you call Gita an allegory, it is wrong to do that, because the language is simple and straightforward without a hidden meaning. So Aurobindo argues here, if you do that, it will be constantly a laborious and somewhat puerile mystification. The language of the Veda and part at least of the Puranas is plainly symbolic, full of figures and concrete representations of things that lie behind the veil. But the Gita is written in plain terms and professes to solve the great ethical and spiritual difficulties which the life of man arises. And it will not do to go behind this plain language and thought and rest them to the service of our fancy. So he is arguing against this approach that Gita is an allegory. He says nothing to do. It is a plain, straightforward truth, and we must understand the text as the language is there. Let's not try to twist the language and try to find out a deeper meaning and all that. He says it's plain truth. So he would say, but there is this much of truth in the view that the setting of the doctrine, though not symbolical, is certainly typical, as indeed the setting of such a discourse as the Gita must necessarily be, if it is to have any relation at all with that which it frames. Arjuna, as we have seen, is the representative man of a great world struggle and divinely guided movement of men and nations. In the Gita, he typifies the human soul of action, brought face to face through that action in its highest and most violent crisis with the problem of human life and its apparent incompatibility with the spiritual state or even with a purely ethical ideal of perfection. So we begin to get deeper into what Arjuna represents. Yesterday we emphasized upon Arjuna representing the friend of the divine. But today, from the point of view of the Gita, we see that he is a representative of man, of a great world struggle and divinely guided movement. He typifies the human soul of action brought face to face with that problem. So here, Arjuna represents, in fact, the common man. But the common man means not any and every common man, but a common man who is struggling on the spiritual path. But a common man who is coming face to face with a world struggle, and somebody who is face to face with the highest and most violent crisis with the human problems. That means, normally in an everyday life, we do not come across crisis problems. There could be simple problems, problems of, little harmony, problems of family quarrels, problems of finances, etc. Arjuna does not represent that kind of a man who is in the material world facing his simple problems. But he represents that kind of a man who really is face to face with a critical situation in his life. What is to be done next? A situation that will really change his entire outlook and his entire action in this life. So that is the crisis of consciousness. So here, Arjuna represents a man who is in the crisis of a consciousness. What is to be done? Because he has a certain idea, and this idea of ethical morality. But now, he has to really undermine his own ethical law, which is not to kill people, not to disrespect the elders and the relatives. So all this ethical law, which is really supported by his reason, we will see his arguments. So now he comes, all this life he never faced that kind of a problem. That's very unique. Arjuna, as you know, he has fought many a war. Never did he ask that, had this problem. Please remember this. Why is it that Arjuna, the great Kshatriya and the greatest warrior of the times, maybe only after Karna, at this point of time has this problem? Even in the wars before, he went straight as a warrior, he defeated the enemy, he caught the enemy, brought him down to his knees, and he was the conqueror. Never was there question. But there's a question now. And that's the question that we need to answer. Because otherwise, our explanation of why suddenly Arjuna gets into this dejection will remain unanswered. And that's the question we need to answer. Otherwise, it's incomplete. So, to round off the argument once again, Arjuna is the representative man of a great world struggle and divinely guided movement of men. Now this is the higher aspect. One is the Arjuna typifies the human soul which is in the crisis. And the other one, he is the avant-garde. He is the representative of the human soul which is moving on to the next level of consciousness. From the moral, religious consciousness, he is moving towards the next level of the spiritual consciousness. So he is one of those representatives who is just, crossing the borders from religion to spirituality. So what is the crisis of such a man who is crossing over? There are not many who are doing that now. But the few that are trying in this yoga or in other yogas, trying to cross over to spirituality, they may have the same problem. So Arjuna on the lower level is this individual, that is his own problem, and then on the collective level, he is this aspirant for a spiritual future, and he is a typical representative of such aspiration. So remember, these are the two ways Arjuna represents humanity. Arjuna is the fighter in the chariot, with the divine Krishna as his charioteer. In the Veda also we have this image of the human soul and the divine riding in one chariot through a great battle to the goal of a high aspiring effort. There it is a pure figure and symbol. The divine is there Indra, the master of the world of light and immortality, the power of divine knowledge which descends to the aid of the human seeker battling with the sons of falsehood, darkness, limitation, mortality. The battle is with spiritual enemies who bar the way to the higher world of our being, and the goal is that plane of vast being resplendent with the light of the supreme truth and uplifted to the conscious immortality of the perfected soul, of which Indra is the master. Well, here he is explaining a little in detail what he had said in the previous chapter, in the last paragraph of the previous chapter, discussing, he says, the symbolic companionship of Arjuna and Krishna is expressed elsewhere in Indian thought in the heavenward journey of Indra and Kutsa seated in one chariot. So he has brought back the same comparison to say that what is the relation between Krishna and Arjuna? It is unlike the relation that we see in the Vedas in the story of Indra and Kutsa, where Indra, he represents light and immortality, who is battling against mortality and darkness and falsehood. And there, the human soul is Kutsa, he who constantly seeks the seer knowledge. And his name, and as his name implies, and he is the son of Arjuna or Arjuni, the white one, child of Switra, the white mother. He is, that is to say, the sattvic or purified and light-filled soul which is open to the unbroken glories of the divine knowledge. And when the chariot reaches the end of its journey, the own home of Indra, the human Kutsa has grown into such an exact likeness of his divine companion that he can only be distinguished by Sachi, the wife of Indra, because she is truth conscious. The parable is evidently of the inner life of man. It's a figure of the human growing into the likeness of the eternal divine by the increasing illumination of knowledge. But the Gita starts from action, and Arjuna is the man of action and not of knowledge, the fighter, never the seer or the thinker. So once again, Shri Aurobindo is bringing into the explanation the difference between the stories in the Veda, those three stories which he had quoted, that of Indra and Kutsa, Nara and Narayana, and the two birds in the Upanishads. So there he is saying that in this story, what do we understand? Kutsa is going with him in the chariot. And Kutsa is already this aspirant, the sattvic and purified and light-filled soul, open to the unbroken glories of divine knowledge. So when the Indra and Kutsa, they are going together in the same chariot, then by the end of the journey, Kutsa and Indra, they become alike. In fact, Kutsa becomes like Indra, and he would say that they were undistinguishable. And it is only Sachi, the wife of Indra, who has to intervene to say who is Indra and who is Kutsa. Well, it's a very interesting episode to say that how in knowledge, this path of knowledge leads you to the identification with the divine. You see, this is also there as the end of Raja Yoga, where this question of meditation and the path of knowledge leads you to the Supreme Brahman, where you lose your identity. Kutsa loses his identity. Whereas in Bhakti Marga, the identity is always kept separate from the divine. That's what Sri Ramakrishna once said. If I were asked, would you like to become the honey or the honey bee? He said, I'd like to be the honey bee, not become the honey. Because the honey bee has the charm of tasting the honey at all times. So why should I lose myself in the honey? So that is the difference of a bhakta. He always wants to remain separate because he is eternally enjoying the divine. But if you lose your identity, then there is no Ananda at all. Because there is no one to taste the Ananda. So he says no. Whereas this Kutsa story tells us that you have lost your identity. You are no more the individual, and that is the story of the Vedas. But that of the Gita is different. He says here he is a man of action. Not only does Arjuna want to keep his identity, because he wants to keep on offering himself to the divine. You see, the joy of offering yourself is so great that you don't want to merge yourself with the divine. And this joy of offering can be there only if you retain your individuality. And not only individuality, but you must be an individual in the world. So a man of action would not like to merge himself with the divine in the other worlds or on the other levels of consciousness. So this is the difference in all the three. Man of knowledge loses his identity. Kutsa and Indra story. The bhakta is the honey and the honeybee. And then the action, the man of action, he has all the three. He has the Lord, he has the joy of offering, and he is upon earth, acting upon earth. The bhakta may lose himself in the temple, in the church, in the forest, in his pursuit of the divine. But a man of action is one who has his foot straight, firmly on this ground. So that is why action or the realization and offering through action is the most integral part, is the most integral yoga by itself. Therefore, we see Sri Aurobindo emphasizing this as kind of the perhaps the shortcut. So the mother says actually vis-a-vis Aurobindo that Aurobindo must follow the karma yoga as given by Sri Aurobindo. So it's again the same thing of the action in the world. And the beauty here, in the first two, Jnana Yoga, you go up to the divine level, the Brahmic level, you lose yourself and you lose the earth. The devotee too, the bhakta gets into the consciousness of the divine so much so that he disconnects himself with the world. But the man of action, as we said, he has the world, he has his soul, he has the divine, plus he brings the divine to the earth. The other two go to the divine, this man brings the divine. That's what Arjuna did. He brought Shri Krishna to the battle of life, Kurukshetra. He did not say, "Oh Lord, I'll come to you. I don't want Kurukshetra. You are my divine and I will be with you." No. He said, "Krishna, I want you to be my charioteer. Come to this life, lead us, guide us." So this is what the man of action does. That is why Gita is so very relevant and so very fantastic. I mean, it's not just it has survived so many centuries guiding mankind. It's because of this integrality of its vision. And now you see, if Lord Krishna is brought down into the battle as a charioteer, then Sri Aurobindo goes to the next step and says, not only he is brought into the life, but he is brought into life to transform life, to change life. Not only to tell Arjuna where to go, which path to go, guiding the chariot out of the dangers, putting him in front of Karna or Bhishma or Duryodhana, whatever. It's not just the guiding, but it is the transformation of the outer nature. That's what is emphasized by Sri Aurobindo, which is absent in the Gita. So, Sri Aurobindo is unique in this, that he takes the Gita as the Gita without superimposing himself on that. That is one of the uniquenesses. All the other interpretations of the Gita, you will see the man, the interpreter, superimposing his experience on the Gita and taking the little chunk of experience. But here we don't find Sri Aurobindo anywhere. We find Lord Krishna himself. Because in the letter Sri Aurobindo would say, my yoga and Gita's yoga are completely different. So Sri Aurobindo does not try to impose himself in the Gita. Although the Lord of the Gita and Sri Aurobindo are one and the same, he doesn't impose himself. He keeps the distance. Because his yoga and Gita's yoga are quite different. The difference is of the transformation. Gita is wonderful to give you what Krishna himself says, to be stationed in the divine consciousness and act. That's the ultimate message of the Gita. He says, be my-minded, manmana bhava madbhakta madhyaji nam mam namaskuru. So everything become my-minded, my devotee, my way of thinking. That means be in my consciousness and act. So Gita ultimately tells us to act in the world just as the divine acts in the world. Shri Krishna says, as all of you remember, that if I stop action for even a second, the world will collapse. So that is the attitude of our action. We must continuously work and work and work, and yet be away from work, and yet be detached from work. What we call in the synthesis of yoga, the renunciation. Some of you are attending these classes of the renunciation. An extraordinary chapter. What is true renunciation? We get here in detail. So what I was telling was that Sri Aurobindo interprets the Gita, brings forth the whole of the Gita exactly as Sri Krishna would have wanted it to be, because he is Sri Krishna within himself. Remember that. He has identified himself. It is Sri Krishna who has guided him. So the vision of the Gita could not have been clearer to anyone except to Sri Aurobindo. And yet he says, my Gita, my yoga is different. One, the transformation is not there. Two, the mother is not there. The Shakti is not there in the Gita. Sri Krishna speaks himself as Purushottama. But where is the Ishwari? He is the Ishwara, Supreme Ishwara, Purushottama, Uttama Purusha. But where is that Uttama Prakriti? Gita does not speak of that. And for transformation, we need that Uttama Prakriti, not only Purusha. And that is why, without the aspect of the mother, there is no integral yoga. Therefore, Sri Aurobindo clearly demarcates. He says, Gita and me are quite different. Krishna and me are one and the same, but Gita and me are different. So you see, as Aurobindonians, we must know the difference. That's why some time back I had given a seminar at Nainital, calling the seminar Beyond the Gita. And the typical Indians were a little hurt in their ego. It says, how can there be anything beyond the Gita? That's the supreme word given by Lord Krishna himself. But it's the Lord Krishna himself who has come into Sri Aurobindo and shown him that how to go beyond the Gita. Try to understand it. It's not trying to compare. How can we human beings compare Sri Aurobindo and Sri Krishna? But we know this truth that Sri Krishna himself told Sri Aurobindo how to go beyond. Sri Aurobindo did not say, I will go beyond. Sri Krishna said, you go beyond me. In the jail, that is what he said. Sri Ramakrishna came and said the same thing. Vivekananda came and said the same thing. To go beyond the Gita. So this is how we have to understand a few things. Of course, there are other differences. I'm not getting into that. That would be a talk in itself to see what is the difference between the Gita and Sri Aurobindo. Well, now coming back, that is the major philosophy of the Gita, where Arjuna is the man of action. Now you see the story of Indra Kutsa and Arjuna and Shri Krishna. That's the great difference. And that's why today all of us must work. And there's no retirement in work. I don't know why people say, oh, I'm retired. You're retired from the job. not your offering and work to the divine. So let's not confuse, I've retired from my job, I have nothing to do. On the contrary, I think after retirement you must work much more. Because then begins your vanaprastha, I suppose. You are no more living for your own family and children and this and that. At the age of 60, when you retire from the so-called job, come into the third level of vanaprastha. Work for the society, the community, the ashram, the schools, the educational principles, whatever. So get into a deeper and a wider ego aspect, the society. Till now, whatever your big work, you were individual family. You earn name and fame and money and everything for your children and family, put them in the bank balance. So after retirement, I would say, get into deeper work for the divine. That is the dispassionate work where you do not have any kind of a motivation for money, not fame, nothing. But please take up work. Because the moment you stop working, you stop growing. The moment you stop growing, there is somebody who sends you the advance notice. You start dying. You see, as long as you work for the divine, death cannot intervene. But it's only when you say, my work is over, then that fellow hears your whisper and says, now next candidate, this fellow, he said his work is over, so let us begin our work. Then comes the disease, then comes the disillusionment, then comes all that, then there comes the hospital, blah, 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 and. So, the healthy attitude that the ancients had given us is after your grihastha ashram, get into the vanaprastha. So do not just waste our time. And therefore, action is the wonderful path, which is the path of transformation, because you call in the divine. Next para. From the beginning of the Gita, this characteristic temperament of the disciple is clearly indicated, and it is maintained throughout. It becomes first evident in the manner in which he is awakened to the sense of what he is doing, the great slaughter of which he is to be the chief instrument, in the thoughts which immediately rise in him, in the standpoint and the psychological motives which make him recoil from the whole terrible catastrophe. I was asking you this question, that why is it that Arjuna buckles in at this war and not in any previous war? This is the answer we get here. You see, if he was the representative of the avant-garde, of the aspirant, who is moving from the religio-moral level to the true spiritual, then the Lord must work out the weaknesses that are there in a religious and a moral person. He brings out the problems of the moralist. Because this Arjuna's questions are asked by thousands of moralists and religious people. How can I kill my brethren? How can I kill my family? How can I kill my gurus? This is a question that all of us not only kill, even abuse, even confront, even face, even fight. So this is a great problem that humanity as a whole faces. So the Lord chose Arjuna and brought out this weakness from him. I'll read out Aurobindo, it's not me telling. And please remember, all that I'm saying in my own words is absolutely ideas taken from Aurobindo. Because I have nothing to say about the Gita, I have nowhere any understanding. But just because God has given me some patience and some insight into reading, so I read the Lord's Aurobindo. And whatever I gather a little bit, I share with you in my own fallacy, in my own fallibility. Well, so coming back, it is that he brings out the weakness himself. Arjuna, he shouldn't have. In fact, we have read this sentence before, that when Arjuna said, "Oh Lord Krishna, take me into the middle of that army," even till that moment, Arjuna did not have this weak point. And it is only when Shri Krishna says, "See and look, the Kula, the clan that you have to kill," that was the instigation, purposely put in by Lord Krishna, so that the problem comes out. You see how Shri Krishna is a mischievous fellow. He pokes Arjuna's ego, so that this problem comes out. And this problem comes out, the answer given is not just to Arjuna. Is an answer for yugas. Yuge will have the same question. And so the Lord knew that we have to face this question, and somewhere we have to move from this religio-ethical type to the spiritual. And now Shri Aurobindo comes back to tell us the spiritualist is coming. And look into the Gita, he has given you the answer how to transfer yourself. And so we need to go to the Gita once again with this new vision that we don't want to be religio-moralists, we want to be spiritualists. So the Lord purposely brings out this problem. So Shri Aurobindo is writing, it becomes first evident in the manner in which he is awakened to the sense of what he is doing. And this awakening, we will see in the next paras, is a marvelous awakening. On every level, Arjuna is hit by this sense of the morality. The physical, the psychological, the mental, the spiritual. Every level, all his levels are suddenly bursting out saying, "Hey, what the hell am I doing?" So it's not just a mental problem to say, "Hey, why should I kill?" The whole vital, the whole emotional, the whole cultural, the whole ethos, the whole clan Kuru is speaking through him. So this kind of a despondency we never expected from the greatest warrior of the times, if it were not for Shri Krishna himself who is doing this mischief. Did we not say whole of Kurukshetra is his doing? If it is so, then the despondency brought about Arjuna is also his doing. So Arjuna says, in which he is awakened to the sense of what he is doing, the great slaughter of which he is to be the chief instrument. And the higher you go as a warrior, the greater is your slaughter. If Shri Krishna had caught one small chota-mota mamuli army fellow or a soldier, the soldier wouldn't have got this kind of a great pang and a pain and a revolt. Because at the most he would have killed one or two or three, that's chalta. But Arjuna would be killing thousands of people. So the weight of the sin is immense upon his shoulders and his conscience. So you say the slaughter, and you see the word is not killing. Arjuna is going to not just kill. You kill with a little banduk, with a little gun. But this is the slaughter. You are face to face, physically. You know, the word slaughter is not normally used in a normal sense of killing. Slaughter is much more violent. It's bloodthirsty, blood oozing. When you kill with a bullet, it's not a slaughter. The bullet may hit you in the heart or somewhere which are out. But slaughter is more bloodthirsty. So Shri Aurobindo is writing here, the great slaughter of which he is to be the chief instrument. In the thoughts which immediately rise in him, all the thoughts which we will see a little later, in the standpoint and the psychological motives which make him recoil from the whole terrible catastrophe. So it is everything becomes a blank. Because the catastrophe is so huge and immense. Not only the men killed, but the women becoming widows, the mothers becoming childless, the sisters becoming without brothers. And then the whole dharma of the clan collapses. So this tremendous catastrophe is such a unthinkable thing that even the greatest warrior puts down his Gandiva. So putting down the Gandiva is not a joke. It is a Brahmastra, remember. So if he refuses even the Brahmastra, so imagine what must be the revolt. Otherwise, if you have 10 machine guns, you say, wow, I can use this and be a winner. But here he has the Brahmastra, the Gandiva. Still he puts down. So you have to weigh the weight of the Brahmastra, the spiritual weight, as against the catastrophe. If they were not equal, he wouldn't have put down the Gandiva. So he says, they are not the thoughts, the standpoints, the motives of a philosophical or even of a deeply reflective mind or a spiritual temperament confronted with the same or a similar problem. You see, if a philosopher were to face this problem, it wouldn't be so very catastrophic. He would sit in the drawing room and say, okay, if I press this button, there will be 30,000 people dying. Maybe that's what Hitler did. He never saw in the battlefield the crying, the horse, the suffering, the suffering of pain. Hitler never knew. He just gave a command and then 6 million Jews of 1 million Jews were killed, slaughtered at one point. But he didn't have the great pang, the pain. So for him it was easier to face the problem. But for Arjuna, who would hear the cry of pain of every man he kills. So you can imagine what a heart, what a soul he must be. So very sensitive. He can't hear that cry. So he says, it is not the catastrophe of a philosopher or a man of knowledge or a man of bhakta, but a man of action who will feel the pang and the pain of every man. So he says, they are those, as we might say, of the practical or the pragmatic man, the emotional, sensational, moral and intelligent human being, not habituated to profound and original reflection or any sounding of the depths, accustomed rather to high but fixed standards of thought and action, and a confident treading through all vicissitudes and difficulties, who now finds all his standards failing him, and all the basis of his confidence in himself and his life shorn away from under him at a single stroke. That is the nature of the crisis which he undergoes. This chapter is magnificent in this analysis of the psychological analysis. So now here he has contrasted the man of action and the philosopher. And this man of action was what? He was a man, pragmatic man, emotional, sensational, moral and intelligent. So he will not philosophize and say, no, Lord Krishna is with me, I am his instrument, so what does it matter if I kill? He is not there on the thought level. He is there on the action level. He is there in a direct contact of the situation. That's why when people sometimes will say, come into the field, you will understand the problems. Don't advise me sitting in your office says, tumko kya malum hai? You may give me a lot of advice. Gyan dena band karo. Come to the field. Tab malum padega tum asliyat kya hai. So this asliyat is you in the physical level. The mental level can never get the asliyat, the reality of the situation. Unless you are a yogi, a person like Shri Aurobindo, who could extend his subtle physical and get the blows of the world on his body. During the second war, the first war, the mother went to Paris. She took upon herself the suffering of those warriors. That's why she felt terribly ill, to the extent of having to leaving her body. It's only that yogi, that avatar, whose body is extended. So their asliyat in the physical field is a reality. Sitting at Pondicherry, they can get the blow. Why speak about Shri Aurobindo and the mother? That you know. You know Sri Ramakrishna himself. He was sitting there talking to his disciple, and suddenly he says, "Ah!" And the disciples were worried, what's happened to Thakur? When asked Thakur what has happened, he says, somebody out there somewhere, they beat a cow, and that beating came upon my back. So is that yogi, because his body is not confined to this room? He has an extension. Sri Ramakrishna had such a wide thing, but the mother had the whole world in her being. So, if you write a letter to the mother, he touched her body. If you spoke to the mother, her ears listened to you. So don't think the mother is here in the confines of the ashram's four corners. Literally, her subtle physical is whole extended into the globe. So that is why she said in a message and in her talks, it doesn't matter you are in New York or in Paris or in Bangkok or in Delhi. I am with you. Literally, I am with you. It's not a spiritual saying that, oh, if you call me, I am with you. It's not a spiritual solace that she is giving you. It is a physical reality she is speaking of. That is the beauty of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. So don't say she is not there. Perhaps I wrote a letter to her and she replied to me, letter versus letter. But if I pray her, she will answer me. Because the same ears of the mother have heard you. So that is the extension of the body. And so when we say the physical reality, a mother, a Shri Aurobindo, a Ramakrishna, these people can get it. But otherwise for you and me, we are on the mental people. We don't understand the reality. So you would say, this is not the problem of a philosopher. It's the problem of a pragmatist. Accustomed rather to high but fixed standards of thought and action and confident treading through all difficulties. See, he's a Kshatriya. High standards of action. He will not go and cheat you somebody. He will not kill somebody from the back. Although he's powerful, he has his own high standards. So such a man of high standards who now finds all his standards failing him. Suddenly this immense problem. He is not able to support, not able to find any support in all his scriptures, in all his morality, in all his Hindu dharma, nothing. Where any Upanishads or the Vedas says, kill your enemy now. May they be brothers or sisters, or not sisters, relatives or anybody. So he says, Lord, where do I go? And at this moment of helplessness, he surrenders to Krishna. He says, now you help me, oh friend, I do not know. Till now he was intelligent enough to find his own solution. But this mega problem, he has no solution. And Sri Krishna typically brings him to this situation where he has to surrender. Where he throws up his hand and says, Lord, you are the only succor, the only grace, the only help. And so that is the moment of opening. Otherwise, you are all confident. You have your Shakti, you have your morality, you have your religion. You are you. But when you are no more you, and when you say, Lord, thou, then that thou, the Lord, comes to you. So this is again a psychological moment prepared by Lord Krishna. So he could give, in the first paragraph we saw, he is now receptive to the higher knowledge. So he says, he has failed, all the old standards have failed him, and all the basis of his confidence in himself and his life shorn away from under him at a single stroke. What is a single stroke? He says, see and look the clan that you have to kill. A single sentence. And Shri Krishna was extremely wise, extremely sharp, extremely shrewd. If he had just said, well, Arjuna, see what is to be done, I'll wait, nothing would have happened. But he gave him that subtle stroke by saying, this is the clan that you're supposed to kill. Look at them. You see, it is a very calculated shot. So that is the single stroke which disarms Arjuna, and that is the nature of the crisis which he undergoes. So this is the collapse. But in the moment of collapse, what happens? What are the things that collapse in him? And we said everything, the physical, the vital, the mental, everything collapses. So he becomes a zero. He becomes nil. And that is important for spirituality. When you erase yourself completely, you have no ego on the vital, the mental, the moral, the religious. When all ego is demolished at a single stroke, then you are perfectly befitted to receive the Lord's grace and the light. So, when we read this of Shri Krishna, of Shri Aurobindo, then you understand the maza of the essays on the Gita. You get the rasa. नहीं तो हम कई बार पढ़े हैं गीता, सर्वधर्मान परित्यज्य, कोई मरते हैं, कोई भरते हैं, we keep on reading. समझ में नहीं आती. But here is for the first time, we see Shri Aurobindo taking us into the mind of Lord Krishna. That is the supreme achievement here.